Today's Sunday, and it's Chof Aleph Tevis. Yesterday was the Rambam's Yortzeit. The Rambam was born in 1135 and he passed away in 1204. Okay, what does that mean? 1135 means 4,895. Okay, and 1204 means 4,964. You get it? He was born in 4895, 1135, and he passed away in 1204. That would be 4964. He passed away 36 years before the turn of the millennia, as it were. Okay? Before 1240 was the year 5000. And a lot of interesting things happened at that time. Not all of them are so wonderful and so pleasant. But that's when the Rambam lived. And to give you a sense of history, Rashi passed away in 1105. That means Rashi passed away 30 years before the Rambam was born. Rashi passed away in the year, he says, Dalad Alafim, Tov Samach Hey, 4,865. And Rashi was born in Beis Alafim Tov. That means 4,800. That would be 1040. That's when Rashi was born, 1040. The Rif was born 35 years before Rashi. The Rif, Rabbi Yossi was born 35 years before Rashi. He was born in Beis Alofim. What would be Tafshin Samach Hey, Tafshin Ayin Hey. That would be, what is it, 1205. But he lived 90 years. Rashi lived 65 years. The Rif lived 90 years. So they passed away at the same time, but the Rif was much older. They passed away Beis Alofim Tov. 4,800. Beis Alofim Tov Samach. He was born Beis Alofim Tov. Passed away. In other words, Rashi was born. I confused myself. In the year 1040, and he passed away in the year 1105. And to give you more of a sense of history, the first crusade was in 1096. The first crusade was 9 years before Rashi passed away. Gzeras Titnu. Rashi writes about the pogroms of the first crusade. His grandson, Rabbeinu Tam, was the Gadol of Yisrael during the second crusade in 1147. But Rashi was a very old man during the time of the first crusade in the year 1096. He passed away in 1105. Rambam was born 30 years later. The bridge between the Rif and the Rambam is filled by a Yid whose name is Rabbi Yitzchak Migash. He's not so widely known, but he was a Talmud of the Rif. And he met the Rambam as a little boy. Rambam was 7 when he passed away, and he met the Rambam, and upon him at the head, the Rambam used to say that he learned Torah from him. The Rambam was 7 years old when he passed away, and people say it's impossible, and I say it's impossible for the Rambam have Bechlal to have existed. If the Rambam existed, then he could have learned from him, even though Rambam was Sach Hakel 7 when the Rimigash passed away. The Rambam at 7 was most people at 700, not at 70. So it's a Chanetzah gegeben, the Rambam. We learned from the Rimigash. So he passed away, like I said, 1204. There's a very, very interesting Rambam which I'm going to share with you, and that is that the Rambam has a Nigeres Teiman, which is not in my collection of papers. If you look at the papers, you'll see that I worked hard this morning. I cut and pasted, because the translation of the Rambam's Nigeres comes with the Arabic. So I cut out the Arabic. Starting on page 2, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I had to cut and paste because every Hebrew column has an Arabic column next to it. So I took out the Arab columns. I wanted to save paper. Starting on the next page after 0. Right, just turn the page and you'll see what I did. I cut out columns. It's a very, very interesting letter from the Rambam, which I'll tell you about later on. But I want to just mention the Nigeres Teiman. Rambam was asked what he thinks about the idea of Nevuah Bizmani, prophecy during his time. And because the people were saying that as prophets, they predicted the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. And the Rambam hat sich nicht geworfen. The Rambam didn't say, flush him down the toilet, you know. The Rambam analyzes the credibility of their nevuah. He talks about them individually, and he says several very interesting things. First of all, the Rambam lists 4 people who had lived before him, but close to him, in the time of Rabbeinu Maimon, his father, who had a din of Nevi'im. The Rambam writes by name, people who lived in certain times in certain places, who made predictions, who were in his battle on the belief, Safek Shunavi. Rambam writes those words about a certain person who lived in exile, not in Eretz Yisrael, not in the time of Bayis Yishin, and the Rambam refers to them as Nevi'im. That's number one. And number two, the Rambam says that I have a tradition from my family, that the prophecy is going to return at a particular date, and he enumerates the time, he fixes the date. What is the date? So it says in the Pasuk that Bilam HaRasha, who we mentioned in the last hour, Bilam HaRasha says, if I'm familiar with Bilam's story, Bilam tried to curse the Jews. He tried once, he tried twice. He said, I'm going to go home. Bilam tried to curse the Jews 3 times and it didn't work. So twice he tried to curse them. The 3rd time he tried to make an ayin hara. And the 4th time, Bilam did something quite interesting. He says, I'm not going to curse them. I'm actually going to say all the good things that are going to happen. But one stipulation. It's far in the future. He says to Balak, don't worry, yeah, they're going to be very blessed, but not now. Not now and not near, don't worry. You can do whatever you want. They're going to get after your descendants in a couple of 100 years, in a few thousand years, but you don't have to worry. So the last nevuah of Bilam wasn't even trying to curse Yidden or to be machas ayin hara. He was simply trying to say that the Baruch of Yidden comes at the end of time. And for those who don't know, the end of time is now. So the Eibishter helfen is on the matam azar tzvachim, and the Yidden zon nicht kala machen. Mir zon nicht kala machen. Any case, so he says that one time in the future, ka'es, at that time, ye'amar li'yankev li'yisrael ma pal kel. It's going to be said to Jacob and to Israel, to Yidden, ma pal kel. What is the Eibishter doing? So it says in Rashi, from the Dosh Chazal, that there's going to come a time that Mechitzas Shal Yisrael will be Lifnim Mechitzas Malachi Asharis, that the place where Yidden are is going to be closer to the Eibishter even than the Malachi Asharis and the angels of service. And the Malachim are going to say to Yidden, Ma Pal Kel, what's the Eibishter doing? Right now, we're much lower than the Malach. There's going to come a point in time, the Malachim are going to ask us, Ma Pal Kel, as they state in Sfarim. I think Rashi says it. The Rambam says, I have a tradition from my family at Ko'es. When this number of years passes again, people are going to come to the Jewish people saying, what's the Eibishter doing? And the Rambam says the following. Bilam was in the year 2488. Tov, Beis Allah from Tov Peches. What is 2488 times 2? It's 4976. So the Rambam says, I heard from my father, heard from his father, till the time of Bayis Sheni, that in the year 4976, Nevuah will return. 4976 would be 1216. 1216 of the Goyish Milim Hisparim. The Rambam passed away 1204. 12 years before. The Rambam predicted during his lifetime the return of Nevuah, and the Rambam passed away 12 years before that time came. And the Rebbe writes in his Sichas and his letters, this is called the Rambam's Ketz, the Rambam's predicted date for the coming of Mashiach, as many Gedei Yisrael had Kitzim. And the Rebbe says the Rambam was not wrong, because at that time there was a radiation, there was a gilui of many Yidden who were very strongly connected to Pnimiyas HaTeireh, to Kabbalah, who were Nevi'im, like Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, like Rabbi Avraham HaChassid, who was his father, Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. Rabbi Eliezer Keach, and the Rebbe lists in the Sikha a number of Yidden who even one of them is mentioned in Tosfos and Shas, and he's called Hanovi. There's a Tosfos and Shas, the Tosfos in Nigle. Tosfos is Ashkenazim, and if you ask them Misnagdim, they'll say, of course, all the Baal Tosfos were Misnagdim, Ashkenazim, who calls to a particular Rishon Hanovi. That's his name. He's called in Tosfos Hanavi. They were called one place in Shas where one of the Chachamim from the Tosfos called Hanavi. The Rebbe says that the Rambam predicted came true, that around that time, 1216, there was a resurgence, there was an Gili of Nevuah. In other words, it was one of the steps in the radiation of Pnimiyas HaTeireh of Kabbalah, which would happen in stages and reach a peak, I guess, not long after that, maybe 50 years after that, with the discovery of the Zohar. The discovery of the Zohar is attributed to Hey Alafim Nun, which is 1290. So 1290, 1216, 1290, it's a generation or two. And at that time there were a lot of big Mekubalim, that the Rebbe said they had a status of Navi. All of the preparation for the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. In any case, this is an interesting Rambam which the Rebbe brings in the Sichos. And now we're going to learn the Rambams that I prepared. I have 3 Rambams here. I'm devoting 2 hours to this. But tomorrow we're going to learn Maimed. In other words, whatever we cover, we cover. Whatever we don't cover, you can take home and do it on your own. In this stack that I handed you, there are 3 letters. The first is a very, very Hatzike Chassidish brief from the Rambam to a Yid whose name was Rabbi Vadia Ger Tzedek. He was a righteous convert. His name was Evadia. And he wrote to the Rambam about the prayers, the tefillas, where we mention the miracles that the Eibishter did L'Avosenu, to our patriarchs, to our fathers. And he says to the Rambam, what should I do? I can't say L'Avosenu, it's not my father. He took us out of Mitzrayim, I was never in Egypt. And the letter, the Rambam answers him, but the letter is one piece of ahava, Pasha. Ein shtik liebshaft. How the Rambam writes to Ger Tzedek, it's so Pasha Chassidische brief from the Rambam. And I want to read the letter from the beginning till the end, even though a little bit is repetitious and time is limited. So we're going to read this letter. The second thing that I printed, also a complete letter, was written beginning on page 2. And page 2 is numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And after 12 comes page 5. It's a letter which the Rambam wrote to Rabbi Yossi of Baghdad. Rabbi Yossi of Baghdad is in Iraq. Okay? The Rambam lived in Egypt. Egypt and Iraq, you know, they're one is Africa and one is Asia. They're not that far apart, but they're separated by several bodies of water and by many hundreds of miles. The Rambam in Mitzrayim was the Rash Kol Bnei HaGoyla. Nobody questioned the Rambam's authority in Mitzrayim. But the Rambam's influence in other places was not necessarily so strong. The Rambam had written a letter to announce his candidate for the Rosh HaKehillah, the head of the community. And the Rambam, living in Egypt, felt authorized to assert his leadership over the Yidden in Iraq. No, I'm fine. You know what? Yeah, a cup of coffee. Yeah, it's on a cup of coffee, yeah. So I can eat the chocolate. The Rambam felt that he was the Gadol B'Yisrael, and he certainly was. He wasn't the Gadol Hador, he was Gadol Hadoros. And he selected a candidate to be the Rosh HaKol. And Baghdad almost burnt to the ground. In Baghdad there were 2 personalities. One he calls the Rosh HaYeshiva. He doesn't mention his name, the Rosh Yeshiva. And the other one he calls Rab Zcharia. I don't know what Rab Zcharia was. These were 2 prominent Jews who they were very intimidated by the Rambam. They were very, very disturbed by the Rambam. And the last thing they wanted was the Rambam asserting himself on their community. And of course, what do you do when you don't like the message? You attack the messenger, and they attacked the Rambam personally. And they said terrible things about his Sfarim and so forth and so on. And there was a Jew in Baghdad, a fanatic, Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi was the Amakushitz of Rambam, and he was ready to burn the city down. He was ready to go to war. And the Rambam writes to him to calm down and to get over it. And the Rambam said, I know you got very angry. Apparently this person blew up and he made mamash a civil war in Iraq. And the Rambam said, you have to back down and bite your lips. He says, the reason I didn't get angry and you got angry is because I have more control over my midas than you do. You still have work to do on yourself, young man. It's a very, very interesting letter. And in it, the Rambam describes himself, his nature and his personality and how he reached the place. He says, you don't understand. These people don't disturb me at all. I feel bad for them that they're so jealous and they're so puny, they're so little. But me, they didn't bother. And you know what? Let them. They are not young people. They're elderly citizens and honorary people in their own right. If this matters so much to them, Rambam writes, I don't want to upset them. It's a very, very interesting letter from the Rambam. And the last letter, which I doubt we're going to get to, but I printed it here just in case, is called the Geras HaShmad. The Rambam's letter, which is a famous letter, the Rambam, which he wrote when there was Shmadis. Jews were forced to convert to Islam. And somebody had written that you're mechuyev to be Mekadosh Shem Shemaim. You have to give your life rather than accept Allah as God. It's the same God, by the way. And Muhammad is the prophet. And the Rambam wrote a very scathing letter about this person who condemned the Yidden who had converted to Islam. It's such an... Also, one of those letters of the Rambam, which is pure ahava. Mamish. all love. So you have 3 letters here, and I really encourage those who know Hebrew to finish what we don't do, because there's no way in 2 hours we're finishing all of this. But it's quite a remarkable window into Rambam. And next year I can bring you another bunch of Rambams, where the Rambam basically says that 99% of people are like monkeys walking on 2 legs. Rambam was a very interesting personality. But let's read these letters. It's mamish a brief full with avas Yisrael. When avas pushet, a love of people, not just a love of Jews. So let's read it. It's on page 0. I numbered it 0. The opposite of 0 is 8, okay, in case you managed to confuse yourself. The staple should be on the right. I can't give any more clues. Tshuva. Shaila me'eretz Yisrael. The Rambam is responding to a question he received from the Holy Land. Min ger tzedek, from a righteous convert. Sheheishev agon Rabbeinu Moshe Zal. That the genius Rabbeinu Moshe, that means the Rambam, responded to his question. Omar Moshe b'Reb Maimon, says Moshe the son of Maimon, Mibnei Gos Yerushalayim Shebisfarad, who's from the Jews who were exiled from Jerusalem, who ended up in Sfarad. Sfarad means Spain. And of course, the Rambam was no longer living in Spain. By this point, the Rambam was already living in Egypt. But the Rambam considered himself a Cordovirer. He came from Cordova, Spain. His family had exiled from Yerushalayim to Cordova at the time of the Churban. In other words, he lived in Spain for 1,000 years. And now he had moved from Spain. Of course he ran from there, yes. Apparently this letter was copied posthumously after the Rambam's Histakas. And we begin to read. Higiu eleinu shailas. Questions reached us from Marana v'Rabbana Ovadia, our master and our Rav Ovadia, Hamaskil, who was intuitive and wise, Hamaven, who was understanding and thorough, Geir Tzedek, the righteous convert. And the Rambam quotes the same words that Naomi told Rus. Yishalem ad Hashem polei. The Eibishter should repay for his good deeds. Utehi maskur teishlema. His reward should be whole. Me'im ad Hashem alekei Yisrael. From the Eibishter, the God of Israel, asher bo lachas tachas knafov, that he has come to shield himself under his wings. This is the exact same words that Naomi says to Rus, but Naomi spoke to Rus in feminine. The Rambam modifies it. You take a look in Sefer Rus, the beautiful words where Naomi describes the virtue of a Geir and a Geirus. So the Rambam writes the same words to this Abavadia Ger Tzedek by the fact that he accepted upon not to be a Yid. Sha'alta, writes Rambam, you asked al iske abrachas va'atfilis, regarding the blessings and the prayers, bein chola bein atzmacha, whether you're davening on your own, or yim tespal b'tzibur, or especially when you're davening with a minion. So he says to him as follows: Hayesh l'chol omer, should you say Elokeinu v'Elokei Aviseinu, my God and the God of my fathers, our God and the God of our fathers. Number 2, v'asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu, that he has sanctified with his commandments and commanded us. He didn't command me; I chose to be commanded. And he brings 7 examples. Number 3. V'asher hivdilanu, that he has separated us. Number 4, v'asher bacha banu, he has chosen us. Number 5, v'shehichaltas aviseinu, you gave as an inheritance to our fathers. And number 6, v'shehitzeisanu mi'etz Mitzrayim, he took us out of the land of Egypt. And number 7, v'sha'asa nisim laviseinu, he did miracles to our fathers. Ukol kiyetze be'elu anyanim, and all forms of a similar type. He asked the Rambam, what am I supposed to do? All over davening, we refer to miracles that occurred to Yidden in historic times, and we say, our fathers. It's not my fathers. So the Rambam writes very simply, Yesh loch leimer akel ketikunan. You should say what's written in Siddur. Do exactly what everybody else does. That's like the Rambam. It reminds me of a story that the Rebbe once by Fabring had itself. The Rebbe told this by Fabring, that he asked the Friedrich Rebbe, whether in benching during Aseres Yimei Tshuva we should say Eisa HaShalom B'Mreimov. You know that in davening during Aseres Yimei Tshuva Eisa HaShalom B'Mreimov, and in Kaddish also Eisa HaShalom B'Mreimov. So we asked the Friedrich Rebbe, so when we bench, we should also say Eisa HaShalom B'Mreimov. So the Rebbe said, der Schwert sich vertracht, getracht a Weile, he thought for a moment, und dann gesagt, man soll sagen, Punkt wie steht in Siddur. Those were his words. Say what's written in the book. It says Eisa Shalom, say Eisa Shalom. The Rebbe did not explain why, But this is the story that he asked the Frierdiker Rebbe about saying Isa HaShalom and benching, like we do in davening and in Kaddish. And the Rebbe thought for a moment, and the Rebbe said, Mezoltan, Punkt wie steht in Siddur. So the Rebbe Rambam writes, Rebbe Vadi Ger Tzedek, Mezoltan, Punkt wie steht in Siddur. Do what's written. It says, our fathers say our fathers. And he explains to him. V'al teshana David, don't change anything. Ela k'moshe yispal v'yavarach kol ezrach mi Yisrael. Just as praise and blesses every Ezrach. What does Ezrach mean? Every citizen, every Jew who's a Jew by birth of Yidden. And I just want you to know that this choice of words, Ezrach, is most precise, because in Chumash, in a number of places, it says Kol Ezrach b'Yisrael v'Hager. Usually the word Ezrach is followed by the word Hager. Ezrach means Jewish people who are Jewish because their parents were Jewish. V'Hager, and a person who's converted to the Jewish people. And the Gemara says Kochem Gager. A Ger and an Ezrach is the same. A Jew who is Jewish from birth and a Jew who is a Jew because he chose Yiddishkeit, is exactly the same. He says you should do what every Ezrach, what every Jew, descendant of Jew does. You should read the same Siddur and say the same words. It's appropriate for you to bless and to pray. Whether you're davening alone, if you're being a chazan. Say what says in Siddur. And now the Rambam goes into a mamish shmuas, a chassidish shmuas. He says like this: the issue is as follows. Avraham Avinu, our father Avraham. I mentioned this to you in the last hour about Avraham Avinu. This is what I was referring to. Who shall limit kol ha'am? Avraham Avinu taught the whole world. He didn't teach Jews. He didn't have Jews to teach. Taught the whole world. Ve'eskilam, and he inspired in them. V'haidiam, and he taught them dasa emes, the religion of truth. And what is the religion of truth? And the oneness of the Rebishter. I always tell you the story. Does anybody want copies? I made 35 copies. There are only 34 ladies here, so there should be enough copies for everybody. If someone doesn't have a copy, someone is holding a stack. There's enough. I'm seeing ladies without copies. Please, send them around. Titman Atayva. 1 second. There's a story that I like to tell always. It's a Gishmak HaMais. I heard from a Galatiana Yidele, a Yidel, that Reb Meir from Mishlanik ben Akint. Reb Meir from Mishlanik was 7 years old. And it was the first night Sukkot. And his father was a big tzaddik. His father was Adam Godel, against Reb Oren Leib. He was a Rav in Pri Mishlan. If you know the history, Reb Meir from Mishlan, there were two Reb Meir from Mishlanis. There was Reb Meir from Mishlan who was from the Baal Shem Tov's Chavraya. And there was a Reb Meir from Mishlan, his Einikel, who was the third generation of Hasidic Rebbes, a co-generation of the Alter Rebbe. The middle between the two Reb Meirs was against Reb Oren Leib, but and he was the Hasidic Rebbe, the Guterid, the Rav in Pri Mishlan. And it's the first night Sukkot. Everybody goes home to eat. And steht in Shalom Pravet, he's davening. To make a long story short, he finally finishes davening and his son is starving. He's famished. 7 years old. He's very hungry. And his father says, going to the Sikkah, going to the Sikkah, they're going to say Shechiyanu and so forth. Suddenly his father stops and says, Ma'ir. He says, Meir, we have any guests? So the son says to his father, not as far as I know. So the father says to the son, how can you come into the Sikkah? The first night Sukkot is the Ushpizn of Avraham Avinu. The whole Metzias of Avraham Avinu was chesed, kindness. How could you have in the first night Sukkot no guest? He said, I'm staying in Shul, you go find a guest. And when you have a guest, call me. And the kid was so taken aback. He was starving. Go look for a guest. Everybody was holding ready by the soup, you understand. The guests were all taken. Go find the guest. And he goes wandering the streets of Pri Mishlan, he can't find a guest. He goes into people's homes and he asks them, maybe they can volunteer a guest because his father's not going to let him eat till he has a guest. And nobody understands what he wants. To make a long story short, he cannot tell. His mamish the music is coming from his stomach is, it's considerable. So he has a premonition. He's walking home and he sees Stefan. Stefan was a goy, a simple man, and he was, so to speak, the shamish of the shul. He used to chop the wood and warm up the water, and he did whatever needed to be done. He says, Stefan, he spoke Yiddish. He says, willst haben gestoppte Gans and frische Challah? He says to him. You want fresh challah and stuffed duckies, of course. He says, come with me and keep quiet. So he takes him into the sukkah and he puts him down into the corner of the sukkah. They had a big sukkah because after the meal, everybody used to come to him to Prava. They came to him because he was the Rebbe. But nobody thought that his son is starving because he has no guests. A kid, he goes to his medrash, he says, Tate Chaba Noirech, I have a guest. Oh, he was so happy. His father comes into the Sikke, and he's standing over there, and he's greeting Avram Avinu, he's greeting the Baal Shem Tov, and he does the Yoshpizen. We don't say Yoshpizen, but you're supposed to say the Yoshpizen right as soon as you walk into the sukkah. Before Kiddush, you say the Yoshpizen. But the Yidden, as soon as you walk into the sukkah, you invite your guests. He's getting ready for Kiddush, and suddenly he stops. He says, where's the guest? So he shows him Stefan. Stefan's waiting for his challah and his duck, and he's keeping quiet. So the father says to his son, you're not embarrassed to play with your father like this? What are you playing around with me? So the little boy says to his father, Tate, Avram Avinu is due. He says to his father, he says, Avram Avinu was here in the sukkah. He says, of course, Avram Avinu comes to every sukkah. He says, but you're special. Maybe you see Avram Avinu. So the father says to the son, what difference does it make to you if I see Avram Avinu or not? Frag aim. He tells him. Ask Avram Avinu if his guests were nicer than this Stefan. Avram Avinu was makarev everybody. It says in Chumash Rashi, Avram Avinu was makarev arvim sheishtachvu lo avok. They worshipped the dust, but it was special dust. It was on top of the shoe rather than under the shoe. Shoyna madrege. Was the dust on top of the shoe could be worshipped. The dust under the feet. This is not dust. If it got on top of your foot, I gotta worship. This was how sophisticated they were. That if it's a little bit higher than my foot, I should worship it. And Avram Avinu was makarev everybody, says the Rambam. Let's continue. The issue is as follows: Shavraham Avinu hu shalimit kalaam. He taught all the people. Yes, you have the place. Ve'eskilam, and he inspired them. I'm using the word haskala al chachma. And he taught them das ha'emes, the religion of truth, which is the Yechudah Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the humanity of the Eibishter. Ubiyat ba'aveidah zarah, and he kicked at, he defied, he defamed idol worship. V'hafer aveidasa, and he broke its worship and its form, which is essentially the belief of many gods and disunity in the Eibishter's creation. And the Rambam continues and he says, he brought many sons, many people under the wings, under the canopy of the Shekhinah. And remember, he doesn't mean Yidden, he means people, human beings. In the time of Ram Avinu, there were no Jews. V'limdam, thank you very much. V'limdam v'hoiram, he taught them and he gave them counsel and direction. V'tziva, and he taught Banov of Nebesei Acharav, his children and his children's children after him. Lishmei derech ad Hashem, to God the ways of the Eibishter. Do you have the place? Huh? No? It's the middle column. The line that begins with the word Vitziva, but halfway down the middle column. You found it? Shkoyach. The Teda says, Ki yadaitiv, because I love him. The Eibishter says, I love Avram Avinu. Why do I love Moshe Avram Avinu? Because Avram Avinu is unique, not only in the respect that he found God, that he believed in one God, but that Avram Avinu was a proselytizer. Avram didn't keep it to himself. Avram Avinu disseminated it. He taught it to others, beginning with his own children. I tell you this so many times, it's boring to me already. But Avraham Avinu has given the world 3 gifts. These are very serious things. One God, charity, and education. That's it. Otherwise, Avraham Avinu didn't do anything. Aside from that, he didn't do anything. Nothing much. Avraham Avinu brought to the world to the notion of one God, Mano. And Avraham Avinu inspired in the world kindness. What does kindness mean? It's non-reciprocal. I'm doing good because good is good, not because I'm going to get something back. And the third thing is, I want my kids to be like me. I'm not a hippie who says I want my children to make their own choices. I want to be a mensch, and I want my children to be mentioned like me and better than me. But I wanted to follow my footsteps, and I'm going to teach them. I'm not going to force them because then they won't be like me. I'm going to teach them. But these are the 3 gifts of Avraham Avinu, ain't kleinigkeit. You take these 3 gifts together, that's all goodness that exists in the whole world. It's these 3 things. And there's Avraham Avinu's 3 virtues. And the last one is probably greater than the first 2. Avraham Avinu, many tzaddikim. But Avraham was a tzaddik who was aviv shel tzaddik, the father of a tzaddik and the grandfather of a tzaddik and so forth. It was important to him to pass it along. I told you many times that the Alter Rebbe and the Mittel Rebbe were always in an argument. What was the argument? The Alter Rebbe said to the Mittel Rebbe, I am greater than you. And the Mittel Rebbe said to the Alter Rebbe, no, I am greater than you. Alter Rebbe said, I'm greater than you because I have a son at Rebbe. And the Mittel Rebbe said to his father, I am greater than you because I have a father at Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe took a groist in the Mittel Rebbe. I am greater than you because I have a son at Rebbe. Right? And the Rebbe Maharash was the son of a Rebbe and the father of a Rebbe. As was the Rebbe Rasha. But in any case, let's get back to the text. The Tater says, Betater is the beginning of a line. Ki yadaitiv, because I love him. As they said in Rashi, Lashon Chiba. He's going to pass along this legacy to his children and grandchildren after him. Vishamru derech havaya v'geimen, they're going to guard the ways of the Yebishter and so forth. Lefichach. Says the Rambam, therefore, when you understand the roots of Yiddishkeit, that it's rooted in Avraham Avinu, and Avraham Avinu didn't preach to Yidden. Avraham Avinu taught humanity about Achdus Hashem. Says the Rambam, therefore, Kol Mishan is Gayer Ad Save Kol Haderis. Any person who converts until the end of time. V'chol hamiyached shmei shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, any person who declares the oneness of God Almighty, k'meishu kosov b'teir, is written in the Torah. And I'm going to allow myself an interpretation. A guy who keeps Sheva mitzvahs b'nei neach is not mizgayer, but he's miyached shmei shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, k'meishu kosov b'teir. You don't have to be Jewish. A guy, a Gentile, who follows the 7 mitzvahs b'nei neach and declares Ad Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, there's one God. And that this God gave us the Torah, the 7 mitzvahs of Neach and Har Sinai, says the Rambam, both of these categories, a Yid who converts to Yiddishkeit, and even if he doesn't, he's called a Ger Teshav in Allah. He follows the teachings of the Torah that apply to a non-Jew. So the Rambam, Mitalmidav Shal Avraham Avinu Olav Hashalom. I think that line is underlined, right? It's from the students of Avraham Avinu. Emes, is that line underlined? So if you lost the place, it's a line that's underlined about a third from the bottom. Who ubnei beise, him and his family, heim kulam, all of them are considered the students of Avraham Avinu. Here's the Rambam says, "V'hu hechzer eisem lamutav," and you should know that a person today who converts, a person today who keeps the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei neach, because they were given at Har Sinai, you know who made them through? You know who brought them to the Eibishter? Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu passed away 3,700 years ago. It doesn't matter. Kishem shehichzir anchei deirei. Just Avraham Avinu brought back the people of his generation. Bepiva b'limudei, with his words and with his teachings. Kach, so too hichazir, he is bringing back. Kol asidim li'izgayir b'tzavah. Any person who will convert, and convert I suppose means a ger tzedek who accepts all the 630 mitzvahs, or a ger teshav, the Rambam calls him. That he doesn't worship idols, and he's ne'echel nevelis. He keeps the 7 mitzvahs of neach. So the Avraham Avinu brought all these people back. Shetziv as banav as basic achar, because Avraham Avinu set the tone. Since Avraham Avinu taught it, and he taught it in such a way that it should be taught to the students, the teachers, the students should become teachers, and those students should become teachers. So Avraham Avinu was the source of the whole message of Achdus Hashem. Nimtza, so the Rambam says, and therefore it turns out that I think this line is also underlined again, right? Avraham Avinu Olav Hashalom. Avraham Avinu, he is the father, first of all, Lezare Haksheda Ma'elchem Edrachav, to his seed that's kosher to follow in his footsteps, that he doesn't include Esav and Yishmael, but Yidden. And second of all, V'ov L'Talmidav. He's a father not just to his descendants, but those who are not his children, but they are his students, as the Rambam Behem Kel Ger Sheyes Gaya, which is an allusion to every Ger Tzedek. Lefichach, and now the Rambam says to this Ger Tzedek Evadia, Yesh L'chal Leimar, you should say, Elokeinu v'Elokei Aviseinu, our God and the God of our father. Shavram Avinu, all of our Shalom, Hu Avich. Rambam says, Avraham Avinu is your father. V'yesh l'chal leima, you should also say, She'enchaltas Aviseinu, that Hashem gave as inheritance to our fathers. Shel Avraham nitna ha'aretz, Hashem gave the land to Abraham. She'nem, as the pasuk says, Loi to him kum mishalach ba'aretz, get up and walk, traverse the land, la'ar kol l'rach, by its length and its breadth, ki l'cho et nena, because it's a gift to Avraham Avinu. So every Ger Tzedek is considered a child of Avraham Avinu. First he calls him a talmid of Avraham Avinu, and he calls him a child of Avraham Avinu. Aval, says the Rambam, this idea of being taken out of Egypt. You did miracles for our fathers. If you wish to change, and to say you took Israel out of Egypt, or you did miracles for Jewish people, you could say that. 5 lines from the bottom. But and even those statements, if you say that Hashem took me out of Egypt, Hashem did miracles to me, there's no crime in it. Why? Because once you enter underneath the wings of the Shechina, 3 lines from the bottom of the middle column, and you join the forces of Yidden and Yiddishkeit. There is no difference between us and you. All the miracles that occurred, as if the miracles happened to us and to you as well. The pasuk says in Yeshaya, ben hanecher. Hanil v'Hashem lemed. The Navi Yeshaya says a Yid who's ben hanecher, he's a descendant of Goyim, who joins Yidden, should never say that there's a separation between a Yid who's a descendant of Yidden and a Ger Tzedek. A Goy who becomes a Yid, a Ger Tzedek becomes a Yid. There's no separation between him and the other Yid. Ein shum hefresh. There's no distinction. Top of the last column, first line. Beineinu bein chala chala, between us and you at all, in anything. Vevadai, continues the Rambam says, and certainly, yesh lecha levarech, you should say the bracha asher bachar banu, that you chose us, v'asher nasan lanu, and that you gave us the Torah, asher hinchi lanu, that you inherit us the land, v'asher hevdi lanu, that you separate us from the other nations, shekvar bachar bachar beirei, the Eibush already chose you. And he separated from the other nations. He gave you the Torah, us the Torah. The Torah was given collectively to us and to all Geri Tzedek, righteous converts. The Rambam quotes the pasuk, HaKohol, there is one community. And there is one law to you and to the Ger Agor, to a convert who joins the Jewish ranks. Chukas Eilam L'Deresecha. This is the second pasuk. It's a law which is forever for all generations. Kachem Kager Yeh. You and the Ger are equal. Torah Achas. This is a third pasuk. One Torah. Umishpat Echad. And one judgment. Yeh Lachem V'Lager Agor Etchem. To you and the Ger Agor. These are 3 different psukim that the Rambam is paraphrasing. So the Rambam says, you could certainly say, my father. You can certainly say that he chose me. You don't want to say he took me out of Egypt, you have that right. But believe me, if you say he took me out of Egypt, you'll be right about that also. Because we're all one people. And I'm sorry. But that's not the halacha. Rashi Pshutei Shomikr says that. You know Hebrew, right? So read till the bottom. The Rambam brings 2 days. And the halacha is that a Ger Tzedek is maybe v'kerei. She does say that. But if she forgot the ben, she doesn't say again. V'dan, you should know. Ki aveseinu sheyatzu miMitzrayim, our parents who were out of Egypt. Rubam evdi avodah zarah hayu b'Mitzrayim. Most of them were pagans in Egypt. Nis'arvu b'goyim, they assimilated amongst the nations. V'yelmedu ma'aseim, and learned from their ways. You have to understand, there's a very interesting nuance here. What happened? This is based, the Rambam Hilchos Avodah Perek Aleph says like this. Avraham Avinu was the father of monotheism, of one God. And he taught it to Yitzchak. And he had a whole base of Avraham, he had a whole family of following. Avraham had thousands of followers. Chassidim. Yitzchak continued Avraham Avinu's legacy, and he too had a Zerah base Yitzchak. Like it says in Rashi, Avraham Magayer, so Anoshim, and Sarah Magayer says Anoshim. Avraham converted the men, and Sarah converted the women. Yankov had a following. And then they went to Egypt. And the Rambam says the Jews in Egypt got assimilated. That it was as though the entire Iked, the entire root, the entire Gezer, the entire trunk and roots that Avraham Avinu had planted was uprooted. At the last moment, the Eibush sent Moshe Rabbeinu and took us out of Mitzrayim. In other words, the Jews in Egypt went backwards. The Jews in Mitzrayim lost their link to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and Moshe Rabbeinu renewed it. So let's keep reading. That's what he's referring to. God Almighty sent Moshe Rabbeinu, who was Rabban Shel Kol HaNeviim, the father of all the prophets. He separated us from the nations. He brought us under the kanfei, the wings of the Shechina, and us and all converts. He gave all of us collectively one set of laws. And here goes the most beautiful words of all. Do not consider your genealogy deficient. If we draw our genealogical roots, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, you are descendant to the Eibishter himself. He calls him first a Talmud of Avraham Avinu, then he calls him second a son of Avraham Avinu. He says every Ger Tzedek is a child of the Eibishter himself. Atom misyaches, I think I underlined those words also, right? Atom misyaches lemi she'omar v'haya ha'elam, you are descendant of the Eibishter himself. V'chei mefurish v'yeshaya zeh yomer l'Hashem ani v'zeh yikra b'shem Yaakov v'gemer. One says I belong to God, and one says I belong to Yaakov Avinu. Translates the Rambam. The Jew who's the son of Jews says I belong to Yaakov Avinu, and the Ger Tzedek says I belong to the Eibishter. This is the Rambam. And the rest of this Rambam is the thing that Mrs. whatever your name is asked me about Bikurim. And the Rabbi, I wasn't going to read it. But now that you asked me the question, I'll read it with you anyway. And everything I just told you, but not changing brachas. There's proof for it from Masechta Bikurim, not against it, but for it. Taman Tanina, it says as follows. But please don't get nervous. Just have a little patience. Hager, a convert who brings Bikurim, maybe he could bring the fruit, but he can't say the psukim because he doesn't own a part of the land. But he cannot say that Hashem swore to our parents to give to us. And the Mishnah says in Bikurim, when a Ger Tzedek davens in shul, he shouldn't say Elokeinu v'Elokei Aviseinu, he should say Elokei Avisechem, your father. If his mother was Jewish, we should say our father. If he's davening by himself, in other words, if he's not the chazan, you should say my God and the God of the fathers of Israel. So it sounds like not the Rambam. Says the Rambam, this is the opinion of Rab Meir, and that's not the din. Rab Meir says that a Ger Tzedek cannot kaireh, and he cannot say Aviseinu. It's discussed in the Talmud Yerushalmi. Taman Amin, it says Tane b'shem Rabbi Yehuda, it says name Rabbi Yehuda. Ger Atzmei Mevi v'kaireh. A Ger Tzedek can read, can bring the Bikurim, and he can say Aviseinu. My timer, what is the proof? What is the reason? Because Avraham Avinu was Av Hamoin Goyim Esaticha. Avraham Avinu was not the father of the Jewish nation, he was the father of all the nations. L'shahav arhaya of la'adam, in the beginning he was a father only to a select group of people. Mekan ve'elach av l'chol habis, at that point he becomes the father of all creations. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Eimen Allah like Rabbi Yehuda, the Allah is like Rabbi Yehuda, and that's sufficient. So there is an opinion which Rashi brings that a Ger Tzedek cannot say Laviseinu, but that's not the halach. The halach is that a Ger Tzedek is allowed to say. Rambam says you should know when you become a Yid, you become a descendant of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and you become a descendant of the Eibishter himself. Okay, we'll take a break, and I'm not going to spend 20 minutes preparing. I already prepared. We'll do it, mamish, in 2 minutes. We'll do the next letter from the Rambam.